Let's pay a visit to Mark's True Crime Corner.
This is not a good neighborhood. I'm scared.
Now, here's your host, Mark Thompson.
So excited to have Courtney with us. She's the purveyor of true crime.
Yes.
And what do you have for us today, Courtney? Something fascinating. I actually got enthralled by this story as well.
Yes, it's the Stainer family. And this is
The Bay Area may know. But we have a lot of Bay Area viewers and listeners, and they may know the Stainers.
And I have to thank Tim Bennett because he wrote to me, and he's been very generous with his time. But one of the cases that he talked about with me was this. And in fact, he knew one of the victims' brothers. And then also Parks and Teresa. They've been really supportive. And so I think that this story is something that, yes, you're right. Perhaps a lot of the people listening and viewing this will know this unfortunate series of events that happened in this family. So we're talking about the Stainer family. This is a photo of the Stainer family. It's Delbert and Kay are the parents, and they had 5 kids, and then there's some grandkids featured in this photo. If we go to the next visual, we're going to be talking about the 2 Stainer brothers. So the younger Stainer brother in the forefront of the picture is Stephen Stainer. He was kidnapped at the age of 7 and returned home at the age of 14 after escaping the man who had kidnapped and sexually assaulted him for 7 years. And the brother in the back, that is Cary Stainer. So he's in the background of the photo. He's wearing a hat.
Oh, yeah, he's in the center, kind of
the
the direct center of the picture. Sure.
And so I chose this picture also because it was part of what Mark and I watched, which was Captive Audience. This debuted on Hulu in 2022, but Mark and I watched it this weekend. And so if you go to the next visual, Stephen Stainer was 7 when he was kidnapped. The photo on the left is actually the last known photo of Stephen Stainer. It was taken the day before he was kidnapped. And then the other 2 photos are recent photos of him when he was kidnapped, and then a missing persons poster about his kidnapping. So if you go to the next visual, Stephen was at school. He was at his elementary school, and his mother was running late. So he decided to walk home. And so he starts to walk home on the path that you can see that's outlined here in this map. And right at this gas and convenience station, he is found by Kenneth Parnell, and a man that Kenneth Parnell ropes into kidnapping Stephen Stainer. Now, they were looking for a young boy, and they happened upon Stephen Stainer. And they told Stephen that they were looking to have his mom donate something to the church. And they told him that their parents had given him the okay to drive him home. So Stephen gets in the car with Kenneth Parnell and his accomplice, and instead of driving him home, they drive him somewhere else, and they proceed to tell him that his family can't afford him anymore, and they've disowned him, and they do not want him to come home, and he is legally now adopted by Kenneth Parnell, and Kenneth changes his name to Dennis Gregory Parnell. Now, within the first week, the sexual assault start on this poor child that has been kidnapped by Kenneth Parnell, and within the first 13 days, Stephen, now Dennis, is calling Kenneth Parnell dad. So a lot of manipulation and, unfortunately, atrocious acts start very early in the kidnapping of this little boy. They move up north. So this is the trailer that they lived in how do I say that? Comtiche, California. Yeah.
How do you say it? I don't know. It is said, I think that's it.
Comtiche?
Yeah, I think that's it.
So he goes to elementary school there, and he's doing, under the circumstances, obviously, he's doing okay as a student in this school. He goes by Dennis. He plays football. He's liked by the other kids. This is a photo of him in his 6th grade class. He's the 5th from the right on the top row. But I mention and bring this photo up because there are 4 other boys in this photo who were also attempted or victims of Kenneth Parnell. Wow. So he was not only molesting his, quote, son, end quote, but other kids that his son would bring to the house, to this trailer. Wow. And nobody was the wiser of what had happened. Now, a lot of people ask about why Dennis didn't try to escape, but in many ways, he didn't think that he could make it on his own. And
He's only 7.
Yeah, exactly.
He doesn't know where anything is or where he is, or, I mean, it's...
And actually the first place that Kenneth Parnell takes Stephen was only hundreds of feet from his maternal grandmother's house. But of course he's 7, so he doesn't know that. But now they've moved to this part of the state. It's slightly farther north than where he is kidnapped. And so he continues to live with Kenneth Parnell in this trailer and going to school. And then they move to this one-room cabin because Kenneth starts to realize that Stephen is growing closer with his classmates. He's getting a better sense of familiarity with them. And so he's starting to open up a little bit about it. He's also trying to not bring kids back to his house because he sees what Kenneth Parnell is trying to do with the other boys. And so Kenneth moves him to this one-room cabin in Manchester, California. And now Stephen's 14. So Kenneth is looking for a new child to kidnap and assault. And he does this when he kidnaps a little boy named Timothy White. He goes by Timmy. Timmy's 5 years old. And so Kenneth kidnaps him, brings him home, and he says to Stephen or Dennis, "This is your new brother." And so Stephen doesn't want what happened to him to happen to this little boy, Timmy White. So on March 1st of 1980, Stephen, now going by Dennis, takes Timmy and walks to the road, and then takes 40 miles of hitchhiking to get to Ukiah. And then there he finds the police and they report Kenneth Parnell. It is at that point that he's returned to his family, I think in the very early hours of March 2nd or March 3rd. So he rescues Timmy White. And he's now...
What an extraordinary thing for a young guy. Now he's now 14,
He's
of
now
course.
14. And
He's lived the house of horrors, and he doesn't want that little kid to live it either.
Exactly. And he walks with this little boy on his back and saves him and finds somebody who picks them up and takes them to this town where then they're reunited with their family. That is a photo of Stephen and Timmy. And then and this is Stephen being reunited with his family. I chose the photo on the right because Carrie really struggled with the return of his brother. I think Carrie, even as a child, had mental issues. But once Stephen returned to the family after being gone for 7 years, Carrie really struggled with that return. He didn't communicate well with his brother, and a lot of attention went towards Stephen. And so Carrie felt very unloved and left out by the family and by his parents. And there was a lot of immediate attention and frenzy around the return of Stephen and the saving of Timmy White. And so after he returns to his family, he begins to start to acclimate to life. He does not admit to any sexual assault. He's very embarrassed by what happened to him. What does happen is they arrest Stephen Parnell and they pull records on him. And he was actually arrested, I think in early 1950s, for sexually assaulting a little boy. And so in pulling that record, they then begin to ask Stephen again, and they find some Polaroids, and they use this information to send him to jail. He's also sent to jail or prison for the kidnapping of Timmy White.
But what's interesting to me just on that point is it's astounding to me that the penalties were so light.
Yeah.
I mean, you kidnap and sodomize this child, and it's a horror.
It's horrible.
And what did he get? I think he got, I forgot, he got some...
So he got 7 years for kidnapping Timmy White, and then he got another 7 years for kidnapping and sexually assaulting Stephen.
But
Stainer.
they let them be served concurrently.
Yes, exactly.
You'd think, and you'll serve them consecutively.
Yeah.
In other words, it'll be 14 years. Nope.
No.
First of all, it should be more than 7 years.
Yeah.
But secondly, the notion that you could have, I mean, who are these judges?
By the way, he only served 5.5.
Right. He got out before. So to be clear, he got out of jail in less time than he actually held his kidnap victim. He held him for 7 years. He got out of jail after 5.5. This guy's despicable. He should be on death row.
It's awful. And if you're watching, the photo on the right is him in 2003, where he was arrested because he approached his caretaker sister, who was a nurse, and solicited to buy a child for $500 who was around the age 5, and she reported him to the police. And so he dies in prison, I think.
But it wasn't until he tried to buy a child, when he's been released from the first sentence that he was serving after the 5.5 years, it wasn't until he was trying to buy a child that he actually ends up in prison and dies and rots like the piece of garbage that he is.
Yeah.
It's outrageous that this culture could allow him to skate that way for so long.
Yeah, and after his first crimes, he was let out, and then he proceeds to kidnap 2 other children, and then he tries to buy a 3rd child. I mean, it's atrocious what happened.
Yes.
So he dies of natural causes.
Anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
These people that are like this, that have this something wrong inside like this, I really don't think they're ever going to get better. Like, there's something wrong that is always going to be this way. And most of the time I think, there's always rehabilitation and whatever, but not for this. This is, once you've done something as horrible like this to a child, you're in forever. Like, that's it.
I agree with Kim. I don't, if you've
you're never going to get out.
You're
a menace to society. You hurt the most vulnerable among us. You've got this weird thing going on with you. You're out. We can no longer trust you around.
Well, you know me. I mean, I'm for hard sentences, man. Long time.
No, it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah. Anyway, but this is not the end of the story, remarkably.
No, it's not the end of the story. I think I mentioned in here that I Know My Name is Steven, which becomes a TV miniseries that is written and shot after Steven returns home. And it debuts in 1989 on NBC. What was it? 40 million people watched it. Some record number of people tuned in to see this. And I think, too, in the creating of this miniseries, Carrie further sort of spirals into this isolation and depression.
Carrie is the brother, again, to remind everybody.
Yeah. And again, he had mental issues from the time of being a toddler. But certainly what happened with Steven further affected him. And so this debuts in 1989. Now, the unfair nature of what happens to this family. So September 16th, there's actually a photo. Steven gets married. He gets married at 20. He meets Jody. She's 17. They have 2 kids. There's Steven Jr. and then Ashley. So Ashley and Steven Jr. Is it hard to hear me?
You can move it as you want.
So Ashley and Steven Jr. are featured in the Captive Audience documentary, but here's a photo of the family. So Steven starts a job at Pizza Hut. He's working there. He is driving on a motorcycle at this time. And on September 16th, 1989, he's at work. He drives home from work. It's raining, I believe. And he's on his motorcycle. And if you go to the next visual, he is actually killed in a motorcycle accident at the age of 24.
It was a drunk. I thought it was a drunk driver, though. It hit him.
No, it was someone that pulled out right in front of him.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
It happened at 4:30 in the afternoon, and he died on scene. So, but
apparently
he was
by most accounts, a really good dad. I mean,
a
real special dad, like a nice. Yeah. How could you compartmentalize that horror that you'd lived through during the most impressionable years and somehow come out and be a great dad? But
I know. And the father, Delbert, did not believe in therapy.
Yeah, wouldn't let him get the therapy that he needed.
So I think it is said through the documentary and other sources that I read and watched and listened to that a lot of the sort of there was a cathartic nature to talking about this publicly and having different things created around this that helped Carrie in some ways. But yes, Carrie dies tragically at the age of 24. He left behind Ashley, who was aged 4, and then her younger brother, Steven Jr. So I believe that is the sort of culmination of the story around Steven Stayner, although later I'll talk about a memorial that's erected to him in Merced. But the next part of this story is really Carrie. So after Steven is lost, the family continues on. Now, Carrie at the time was living with his uncle, and his uncle is shot in the home that Carrie is living with him after Steven dies. They never found the person that shot the uncle. His name was Jesse. But Carrie is living with him, and Carrie is kind of going from job to job. He was voted most creative in high school, and that's his high school photo if you're watching in 1979 at the Merced High School. And but he really doesn't have a career per se. He ends up working at the Cedar Lodge in El Portal, California. And he gets a job there in 1997, and he's a handyman. And he's there for 2 years working as the handyman. He really likes two things. He likes being alone in the woods, and he really likes being naked. He often frequents, a nudist colony that's in the area. But he was also seen kind of skinny dipping in and around Yosemite Park. But he was very
There's
much
a nudist colony near Yosemite Park?
Yeah, there is. It's called like Light. I don't know.
Well, I don't.
Yeah,
I don't need the
I
name.
can't remember the name. I mean, I know.
Google it. Yeah, right. Okay.
I don't know if you've been there, Mark. But he frequented there. Now he was as I mentioned, he was at Cedar Lodge for 2 years. And one day he's walking by a room and he sees a red Pontiac parked outside of this room, and he looks inside because the curtains are slightly opened, and there's a mother and 2 young girls, and he notices that there is no man with these 3 women. So he goes to the room and he approaches these 3 women. Now, the 3 women in the room were Carol Sund. She was the mother of Julie Sund. Her name was Juliana. And then they were traveling with Julie's very good friend, Silvina Pesolo. And Silvina was from Brazil. She was visiting. And so, or she was from South America. She might have been from, she was from South America. And so they're visiting. They go to Yosemite Park. They're there for a couple of days. I think they arrived on February 12th. But this all happens on February 15th. So Carrie sees that there is no man in the room with Carol and the 2 young girls. So he goes to the door and he tells him that he has to fix a leak. And so he goes inside of the hotel room. Now, if you're watching, the photo on the right was taken just hours before the women were murdered. And so Carrie goes into the bathroom, says he's going to fix a leak, and he comes out with a gun. He kills Carol in the room and Sylvia. And then he ends up sexually assaulting Julie and murders her. He takes Julie's body to a different place than where he takes Carol and Silvina. And he puts Carol and Silvina in the back of the car, but he, again, takes Julie to a different area. There are missing posters. This all happens, as I mentioned, in February, but nobody can find the women. They do find Carol's wallet in a different city, in a different sort of part of the area. But again, they go missing and nobody has any information as to where they are. Somebody sends an anonymous map to the police. And this is, of course, Carrie, but at the time they don't know who sent this. And it shows where Julie's body is buried because people searching the area find the car, that Pontiac, that has the bodies of Carol and Silvina, but they have not found Julie. And so you'll see on the right a map of where the crimes and the locations of the body. But on the left, you'll see the hand-drawn map that Carrie sends to the police. So they find the body of Julie. Now, they go around El Portal and the surrounding areas, and they bring together men that have been arrested for sexually assaulting women and rape and other crimes against women. And they question Carrie. In fact, Carrie opens up various motel rooms at Cedar Lodge for the FBI. But he's so calm in the interviews and he doesn't have a criminal background that they let him go. It is when Joey Armstrong is found murdered that they end up arresting Carrie. And so Joey Armstrong was a naturalist in Yosemite Park. She was a guide, and she worked for an organization that was inside of the park. She is found murdered, and somebody reports seeing a powder blue car just outside of her house that was inside of Yosemite, and that car belonged to Carrie. So they actually put out something called BOLO, which is Be on the Lookout. not like YOLO, not like FOMO, but BOLO. And in this BOLO, the nudist colony that Carrie frequented called the FBI because he was there. And so the FBI goes and arrests Carrie and questions Carrie for the murders of Joey, but then soon to be the murders of Julie, Carol, and Sylvina, because he admits to all of that. And so this is where Joey lived. And then if you go further, I think
And he took the authorities to all the places that
he took them all.
described exactly what he did with each one of his victims. It's pretty bizarre and gross.
Yeah, it is. And in the show that we were watching last night, not only do they show that FBI video that had never been shown before.
That's the video
classified.
with him taking him, like, you know. Right.
Yeah. But one of the reporters that is one of the first to speak to Carrie after his arrest talks about how Carrie admitted to him and confessed to him the murders of these 4 women, but had said, I'm only going to tell you this because I want a TV miniseries done about my life. And so it brings into question how long he had been tortured by
Living in the
that
shadow
happened
of
with
Stephen.
Yeah. So he confesses, he's tried, and he's given the death penalty. So he is actually in San Quentin. So I have some images that are more recent of him in San Quentin. I think the one on the right, if you're watching, is from 2018. It was one of the more recent ones that I could find. But he is in San Quentin on death row.
Wow.
The last 2 images that I have in this are ones that are celebrating the lives of the victims. And so there's a organization that was started called the Armstrong. If you can go down one. Sorry. Thank you.
Armstrong Scholars
Partner. And with Nature Bridge. And Nature Bridge was the organization that Joey worked for. And this gives money toward young girls between the ages of, I think it's like 13 and 17 or 13 and 15 that are interested in sort of the naturalist and nature. And so it allows them to travel to the park and study there. And then the final image is of a memorial that was erected in Merced, California, for Stephen and for Timmy. Timmy White was a police officer here in LA. And he dies tragically at the age of 35 of a pulmonary embolism. Yeah.
Jeez.
So both of them died very young.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a bizarre
And Timmy left
sad
behind a wife
tale.
and kids. I know.
Well, I'll say this also. I recommend this 3-part film. There it is, Captive Audience, 3-part documentary series. Each one is about an hour, a little under an hour maybe. And I'll tell you something else. It's so wonderfully created, this story. It is brilliantly directed. I mean, they made a lot of creative decisions in putting together this Captive Audience, a real American horror story, that I thought were just fascinating, interesting, and I tried to get the director on the show today. I thought, I've got to get her on.
Yeah. It was really interesting. One of the choices, sort of the narrative choices that they included was the writer of the TV movie. And he becomes almost like part of telling this story. Mm-hmm. And so in some way he was documenting through audio recordings the writing and creation of the TV movie. And they use that a lot as part of the insight into telling the story of the Stainer family. And a lot of that comes because the writer of the TV movie interviewed the entire family at length. And so
that's one of the most fascinating aspects. It's
into the experience.
It's on Hulu, and I recommend it. And we could talk about it more, but we're running so far behind. That is a great story, fascinating story, horribly sad. I mean, profoundly sad story. Also for its layers of sadness, but also for the obvious things that were missed, and also for the high-profile nature of the way media sort of hounded this family. That becomes a part of things as well, and it becomes a critical part of perhaps what drove Carrie to do what he did. So I recommend the series, and so well told, Courtney. Thank you very much
Thank you
for
having
being
me.
here.
It is a long story, so I do a little bit apologize for the length, but there's so much too that I didn't include. It was a really it was really tough and fascinating. But the family, most of the family is featured in the series. So
That's True Crime Corner for today.
True Crime Corner, only on The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.